John, well, let me ask a follow-up question here. If there's someone listening in our audience who's in one of these professions, who has the biggest target painted on their backs at this point? Who needs to be getting ready right now for this question to arise in their profession? So we've got medical,
Yeah.
administrative officials in the military. Who else?
Educators,
Educators.
certainly educators. Yeah. And that means two groups, right? Certainly Christians in a public education setting, whether at a university or at a school. I mean, you know, basically being forced to use pronouns, which in my mind falls into the category of a lie, right?
Mm.
Calling someone by a chosen name is that name refers to them. Calling someone a he or a her or a them refers to either a singular or plural group of people with a particular sexual identification, and so it tends to exceed that. But you can get a lot of trouble for that. The Daily Citizen just got kicked off Twitter for that, or not the Daily
Right.
Citizen. Yeah, is it the Daily
Citizen, is it Citizen
Citizen
Link?
Daily? Citizen Link, yeah, but I,
Okay,
I
yeah.
think it's called the Citizen Daily
Okay.
account. So it's a remarkable thing. I think so. I think that's it. But I think in some way I think those are kind of key. Sorry, I think those would be kind of the first two kind of in line. By the way, it's not just educators at public institutions; it's also Christian educational heads of school,
Mm.
whether we're talking about presidents and provosts, or whether we're talking about boards or headmasters at schools, because that's going to come back in a vengeance in a hurry. And if the Equality Act gets some traction at any level, even a neutered down version of the Equality Act is going to cause a lot of challenges there. So, but look, I say that, Shane, and I think we've heard from seven, or I mean, we need to go back and total them, but I think we've heard probably from 7 or 8 different professions
Right.
on this one issue. And you know, I wouldn't have thought of some of them. And that's going to be, that's going to be an interesting question.
Hmm.
You can't say that this lie is true. Uh, at this fundamental level, a level in which so much of society depends, who are males, who are females, and pretend like what does my sexual beliefs have to do with you, or how is
Hmm.
this going to hurt you? It just changes everything. There's a compliance that's being forced, and Douglas Murray and some of the people that are other letters in that acronym realize just how uncomfortable it is. um, so yeah, it's a good question, Shane. I those educators and healthcare workers seem to be at the top of the list, but I don't think very many people are far behind.
Hmm. Yeah, because they're the ones who actually have to use the pronouns and use the knives and the hormones and so forth to bring about this false reality that we've decided needs to be brought about. There's
But
a
I mean, think about it. You could think about Christian camps,
yeah.
especially organizations that are evangelistic, not just kind of offering a place for the church youth group to go, but
Hmm.
also, kind of doing something more widely. You know, retail workers. I mean, I'm just thinking of, my daughter who's about to, work, head into her first job, probably within the next year. And, what's she going to be asked to do? These are live questions.
Hmm. There's another dimension to this, John, and we've talked about sort of the hard power side of it with government edicts like the Equality Act that could come down and change the way we view discrimination in this country from a legal standpoint. But there's also the soft power side of it. There's the issue of corporations and what they allow, and that the way you mentioned, Citizen Link there really brings that to the fore because this is a focus on the family Twitter account. It is,
Mhm.
this is a mainstream group, as Christianity and skepticism toward the transgender movement gets. That's it, and I think it was an issue of offense given to a newly appointed transgender administration official who that caused Twitter to take them down. And as far as I know, the appeal was rejected, and it's still down. So this brings us into our next question here, and it's one I really liked when we got it, and I'd love to unpack it here because it's about this question of the public square and soft power and how we can still express ourselves and even talk when everything's being throttled this way. This person writes in, I recall in the 70s and 80s moving from street preaching and giving out tracts in the downtown where the sidewalk was public property to trying to preach or even just hand out tracts in the shopping mall. The shopping mall seemed like a public square, but it was private property and they shut us down frequently. Very little of our lives in the USA is lived out in the public square these days. People live in isolated homes, remote from one another. The people we meet in stores, even if we talk to them, are more likely to be strangers than neighbors. Newspapers and news stations are increasingly national corporations instead of local entities. I'm not sure what the question would be other than to ask if you would consider doing a follow up on this topic that addresses the gradual historical move in the direction and ways we can participate in quote unquote the public square without dependence on corporation controlled space. They say concourse here, but I think they mean space. And the question there gets right to the root of what we're talking about. Increasingly, there is no such thing as a public square where we can express ourselves, or it's been shut down by laws and regulations like we're talking about. And now the same thing's happening in the private space that we've turned to in the internet for first and foremost. So what do we do in reaction to that?
Yeah, what do we do is a great question, but I think it's important to understand that all the political conversations we've had over the last 18 months, all the heat around the election and even the post-election chaos with the riots at the Capitol, all the handling of the pandemic and all the ways that different people have thought about that and communicated about that. Uh, and we could, all the ways we're being educated, all the ways we're entertaining ourselves, all the ways we're trying to do any sort of leisure activities, all of this, the context for all of this is exactly what this person just said. It's a very, very important reality that many people miss. Many people miss just how dramatic a difference that that's happening right now, living in what we might call the information age. And it's not just well, let's go back here. So the shift to the industrial age from the agrarian age moved, the center of life from the home or the farm to the city, to the
I feel like
workplace.
you just pulled out your slide projector and the room went dark and you're like giving us the
Let me give
history
you the
lesson.
we look back on that as if it were kind of something that happened overnight. It happened over decades and it dramatically changed every aspect of our lives and our life together, right?
Mm.
We're in the middle of that same shift. It's called the information age. We're going from industrial age to information age, and it's slowly moving us away from even centralized, locally centralized, places of employment or work or whatever, and making it more and more national. And we could say corporations even are becoming more and more global, not just more national. And all of this is changing things. It's changing things dramatically. And at the same time, as we've said several times over the last several weeks, all the different mountains or spheres of culture that are supposed to carry the cultural weight are getting smaller and smaller and thinner and thinner. And that includes families and local communities. Now, you do see some backlash against this, right? So one of the backlashes is the app Nextdoor. Nextdoor is this app that tries to put you in a virtual community with the people who live right next door to you. And it's
Hate next door. I'm in next door. All they ever do is complain about whose dog is loose and, pooped on whose lawn. And
I'm about, yeah. It is one of those things that kind of bring out the worst in people.
yeah,
But what is it? It's a digital replacement for what should be happening, right? Which
yeah.
is kind of local community and local connection. You can go through the same, the other backlash or the other corrective is something that was becoming very, very popular prior to COVID, which was these kind of new build communities that are around where you can eat, work, shop, live, all together. Or, businesses like local coffee shops becoming more and more. You have the convenience coffee shops, which Starbucks increasingly became, but then you also have kind of the local artisan, sorry, the
Hmm.
local artisan shops, where people know how to put that little heart on the top of your macchiato. But that's really encouraging a different way, even the way the stores are set up, and or the restaurants are set up and so on, to create community.
Yeah.
And I think that tells you we need it, um, and people want it, even though there's so many cultural forces that are thinning that local work out. So it is a reality, and it's impossible to understand almost anything about our lives in the 21st century, and our lives
Mm.
together in the 21st century, if we don't have that backdrop clearly in mind. So that's why I really appreciated the way this thing was
Yeah.
stated.
Yeah.
There's not much of a public square. The public square has become a private square. The government shut down the public square. The corporation shut down the private square. Have a good day.
Yeah.
This is kind of where we're at. What do we do? What if it's as simple as love God and love your neighbor as yourself? I mean, what if it's, Proverbs, a soft answer turns away wrath, seek wisdom, don't hang out with fools.
Both
Um,
excellent ideas when your neighbor's dog comes and poops on your lawn.
it sounds like you have a problem that we're just learning about here,
Well,
Shane.
everyone knows that I hate dogs, which isn't true, but everyone knows it anyway. And yeah, that truly is the majority of the conversation on the
On
next
next
door
door.
site.
Yeah, I could talk about next door, but I'm not going to. It's at one level, it's an interesting idea that human nature is still human nature, no matter if
Yeah.
you're on an app or whatever. But I just wonder how much of the basics we're going to have to return to, the basics
Mm.
of getting to know each other, the basics of thick community, the basics of looking after each other. You can't have those hard conversations you need to have with your neighbors about things that matter on Nextdoor.
Mm.
Just go to Nextdoor and look at a thread, right? You can't even have easy conversations that shouldn't be controversial without them being controversial on Nextdoor.
Yeah.
But when you can have it is if you have a long-standing relationship, if you know each other's names, if you know each other's kids, if you're asking about other things. Doesn't mean the conversation's easy. It
Mhm.
just means it's possible. But we're losing the places and the skills and the realities where that stuff is possible.
Yeah.
Um,
John, I'm a big believer in the idea that understanding a problem is halfway to solving the problem. And one of the things that conservatives are often hesitant to admit, and we need to get over this hesitancy, is that just because something is done by a private entity, or just because it's part of quote unquote capitalism, doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's praiseworthy or helpful in the long run toward human flourishing. We need to recover a bigger idea of human flourishing. And it doesn't mean that we have this all-powerful government that comes in and tries to save us. But the Bernie Sanders answer isn't the answer. But what is the sort of Burkean answer of recovering the mediating institutions, of the things that we've lost that have left the public square so denuded, and our private square, so to speak, controlled by a ever diminishing number of global corporations like Twitter and Facebook and Google and so forth. The best thing that I can recommend on this, John, is Carl Trueman's new book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Just came out this year, and he talks about how the amoral economic influence of technology really changes the moral questions that we end up asking. So he's not saying that things like the internet or the automobile or suburbia or any of these other developments are intrinsically morally either good or bad. What he says is that they bring up new moral questions and force us to grapple with our design and our decisions in new ways. And they change the current. They change the direction of the current. They make it more difficult to have organic community. They make it a lot easier to ignore the rhythms and patterns of nature that remind us of our vulnerability. They create the illusion that we are gods, that we can zip to and fro. If we don't like a community, we can just leave it. If we don't like a church, we can leave it. And it leaves us, as a result, very isolated because we just go with the flow of these technologies. The key to to defeating this influence and to reclaiming organic, natural, real community as human beings and as Christians is not going to be to, give up our cars or give up the internet. Although I think we should be much more moderate with our use of some modern technologies. It will be to recognize their influence and then redirect it in ways that will allow us to, reclaim that community. And that was something that many of our ancestors didn't have to deal with. To get out the slide projector here for a minute more, um, in medieval times, Truman talks about how the patterns of life and death, of seed and harvest, of spring and summer, fall, winter, all of those reinforced in people's minds the realization that they are vulnerable, that they are dependent, and that community is their means of survival. But now we have this technology which removes us from all those natural rhythms and tempts us to believe that we are like gods, that we are more than we really are, and that we can exist without these things. But we can't. We can't exist in a denuded public square for long. We need each other. And ultimately, I think it's going to begin with recognizing that fact and then getting out of what I like to call the hamster tunnels. So the preconceived, prefabricated ways that you're supposed to travel, interact with people, and just live in general. So like Neo in the beginning of the Matrix, he's in this world of illusion that looks a whole lot like our world, and he just goes to work and comes home and watches TV, and maybe he goes to the gym, and then he repeats the whole cycle again and again. He doesn't even go to church, of course. So that rhythm, you got to disrupt it. You got to get out of that and sort of, I'm not saying take the red pill here, but kind of take the red pill. Be intentional about, like you said, meeting your neighbors, about spending time with family, about choosing or at least prioritizing locality and place above necessarily convenience. Go to a church that's closer to you than the church that's a little farther that you might like better. All of this I have to preach to myself too, because I'm not as good of friends with my neighbors as I could be. I could probably go to a church that's a little bit closer to me, and deal with people that I might not have chosen otherwise. But all of those things are how we fight back against the influence of the malign influences of technologies that are not going anywhere, but we have to be aware of, have to recognize. And in the end, if Twitter and Facebook and Google and all those mega corporations keep going the direction they're going, we're going to have to find a workaround. We're going to have to, as Christians, find another way to get out there and talk to each other, because it looks like our beliefs are quickly becoming verboten in those spaces.
I hope we make that decision though, not just when somebody kicks us out, right? I
Right.
mean, I hope if we see that what we're doing in these, what did you call them, hamster tunnels,
Yeah, hamster
um,
tunnels.
is bad for us, right? It brings out the worst of us.
Hmm.
If next door is, should cause you to offend your neighbor, delete next door, right? I mean, it's a little bit easier than plucking out your eye, but it seems to be a kind of a relevant conclusion. If it's not good for your soul, if it's actually not actually advancing the message of Christ in the public square, then stop.
Hmm.
I hope we can make that decision, and it's not just when somebody pulls the plug on us.